Missouri gains one former SEC receiver in Cayden Lee, but loses another that we thought it had. Let's make sense of it all right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on today's program, a lot has been made of course, the SEC the last few seasons, not winning a national championship, having a pretty terrible bowl season, to be honest with you. Missouri was a part of that, to be even more brutally honest with you. But you know what, as a Missouri fan, I'm going to make the case why I don't care later in the show. Plus, on the basketball side, did Missouri really save its season, or was I being a little hyperbolic on a Saturday evening? Let's talk all about that as the program unfolds. First, I do want to tell you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. And as I said, and as I believe I originally reported out there, Cayden Lee signing with the Missouri Tigers. Cayden Lee, the former Ole Miss wide receiver, good friends with Austin Simmons, one of Missouri's new quarterbacks as well. And it sounds like Cayden Lee is going to, slot in right in the slot position for Missouri that Kevin Coleman left behind. So Missouri replaces a former Mississippi State wide receiver with a former Mississippi wide receiver this season in 2026. And by all accounts, Cayden Lee should be an immediate starter. It really does sound like, and somebody should have immediate chemistry with Austin Simmons, your presumptive starter as well. And I will emphasize presumptive, and I'll probably not say presumptive for most of this offseason, but I've had, at least every once in a while you'll have somebody say something like, hey, Zollers could win the job, that type of deal. Matt Zollers, who will of course be a sophomore next season for Missouri. Yes, thank you very much. I'm well aware that Matt Zollers is still on the roster and could win that job. But if you're telling me that you want to take an even money bet, Austin Simmons versus Matt Zollers, I will book that particular wager right now, is all I'm saying. So, as the host of the Locked On Mizzou podcast, please assume that I am aware of that particular fact. But one thing I was not aware of on Saturday, I have to be honest, I sort of thought, hey, I got some information here too, after having some information on Cayden Lee. Well, former Miami Hurricane Bobby Washington, another, by the way, not just a Miami Hurricane, but really another Miami area player, along with Austin Simmons and others that have been added during this process. Well, Bobby Washington, another addition here late in the portal for the Tigers. Well, I'll be honest, I was at the Missouri game and wasn't really paying attention to social media. I wasn't exactly breaking any news there when I said Bobby Washington was going to be the next addition for Missouri, but I was correct. That's all that really matters in the long run to me. But you know what? Speaking of something that wasn't correct in the long run, not that the reporting was wrong, but, our assumptions were wrong, I suppose. Horatio Fields, speaking of former wide receivers in the SEC, Horatio Fields from Auburn, weeks ago, it had been announced he was going to sign with Missouri. Well, unfortunately, he never showed up, according to Gabe DeArmond at Power Mizzou, never enrolled with the Tigers. And after adding Cayden Lee, this according to Power Mizzou's Twitter feed, we do not expect Fields to end up at Missouri. So that seems like that's pretty much signed, sealed, and delivered at this point, that it's going to be Cayden Lee and not Horatio Fields. So that does change my calculation a little bit. I was saying, hey, I really like what Missouri has done at wide receiver, and I still do for the most part. Of course, hey, another former SEC guy, Nashawn Montgomery, a former Florida Gator, is entering the fold as well. He definitely has a lot of upside, but it just seemed like I will say, when it seemed like Fields and Lee were going to be in the same class, well, that gave me certainly more hope and more options for Missouri, a bigger margin for error. But I still like what Missouri has coming in at wide receiver here with the uber talented, I would say, Donovan Olubade coming back next season, who is already on the roster for Missouri. Now you've got Cayden Lee coming in. I think Caleb Goody from Cincinnati is going to be a very nice replacement for Marquise Johnson at the very least. On the outside is your vertical speed guy who can take the top off of the defense. And by the way, with either Austin Simmons or Matt Zollers in the fold, you've got a quarterback who in theory has plenty of arm to punish defenses that are playing maybe a single high safety or playing a little bit too tight defensively. Whatever the look might be, I think you've now got strong-armed enough quarterbacks to punish those looks. And by the way, offensively for Missouri as well, another addition in the backfield, running back Preston Hatfield was added as well. He had some massive numbers in the high school ranks from the state of Missouri. But basically when it comes to the portal, it seems like Missouri has more or less wrapped up the activity here. I'm sure we'll get some stragglers, I guess, some names here and there who probably won't be the biggest names in the world at this point, because now that we're a week out from the national championship game, I think it's fair to say that most of the big fish have been caught and reeled in at this point, including Damon Wilson, who went to the Miami Hurricanes as well. So let's transition to Missouri basketball for a moment. I'm definitely going to get back to football here as the program heads along, but I do just want to say something. If you have not been to Mizzou Arena this season, and by the way, if you didn't make it on Saturday afternoon against Oklahoma, especially if you're an out-of-towner, totally understandable, of course. But just if you have not been to Mizzou Arena this season or recently, and you are a Mizzou basketball fan, I really do encourage you to make it out, because to me, it's just so much more fun than watching the games on television. And of course, on the road, I get the television experience, and I just find myself a lot more frustrated watching it at home than in the arena. Part of that is the production, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. To me, it's just when you're actually in person, you're with other Missouri fans. I was there with my brother-in-law and one of his buddies, and to me, it's just so much easier to just get lost in the moment as a fan when you're in there with thousands of other people. It's sort of the good part of mob mentality, I would say. It's just easy to get lost in the moment and be a true fanatic and cheer the fan on, especially with those two buzzer beaters that Missouri hit by Trent Pierce at the end of regulation and Mark Mitchell, of course, at the end of the first overtime, just to go crazy, go wild, and remember, oh yeah, this is supposed to be fun, isn't it? And not worry about the big picture every second. And the reason I bring this up is because I did have a few commenters who are more just, wanting to have their arms folded no matter what happens so they can seem like the smartest person and most rational person in the room at all times, saying, well, we still barely beat a bad Oklahoma team. Congratulations, guys. Really. Is it okay with you if I just have a moment of happiness in my otherwise dreary life? And I'm being hyperbolic there with the end of that sentence. But really, I did have some people even say, wow, John, you're being a little hyperbolic by saying that Missouri saved its season. Well, you know what? Let's address that. And let's address where Missouri is basketball-wise. Let's be real. Where is Missouri in this basketball season? Let's compare it to another SEC team that I think gives me a lot of, a really good gauge on where to measure this particular team. Plus, I want to talk more football, of course, including, punting versus field position. And this is going to get a tiny bit nerdy, but really not that nerdy. It's just something, it's actually more logical than nerdy. We're going to get to more football as the program unfolds here on Locked On Mizzou. But you know what? First, I got to tell you, it is the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one final kickoff. the last chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. And it is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone has been waiting for. And if you're a new customer, bet just $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is finished. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So did Missouri basketball really save its season on Saturday with those 2 buzzer beaters? Well, sure. If you want to be overly technical and pedantic about the whole thing, of course Missouri could run the table, even if it had lost on Oklahoma and ended up 14-4 in the SEC, which obviously would have been good enough to, heck, maybe even win the league, much less go to March Madness. But cool. Thank you for that utterly important point. My point is that I just couldn't see a path where Missouri lost those 2 home games in a row to Georgia, and in particular losing to Oklahoma. I just couldn't see them making the big dance had Missouri lost that particular basketball game. Would it have still been possible? Yeah, of course. I just think the path would have been so difficult, it probably wasn't very likely. And by the way, more importantly, my perception is also that the NCAA March Madness Committee tends to punish, and I mean really punish, weak non-conference scheduling, especially in the 2020s here. And Missouri, I think, has experienced this a little bit the 2 times it has made the field of 68 under Dennis Gates. Sure, they made it, but I think both times, Missouri was a little bit disappointed with its seeding. And by the way, I think 2022, you go back to that season, that March Madness, when Texas A&M, I think, experienced exactly what I'm talking about here, which is a weak non-conference schedule will be punished harshly by the committee. And I think, again, A&M's a perfect example here, a fellow SEC school. And in that 22 season, despite being 500 in the league, despite going 9-9 in the league, and by the way, winning 3 games in the SEC tournament, making it to the championship game, well, the Aggies were left out of the field. And Dick Vitale lost his mind famously on it, for example, and was acting like we needed a possible act of Congress to rectify this travesty. But importantly here, Texas A&M's non-conference strength of schedule that season was 308th. Not their overall strength of schedule, because if, of course, you put the 18-game SEC schedule, well, suddenly that's a top 100, top 50 type of schedule. But just the non-conference portion, 308. And this is important to know because Missouri's for this particular season is even worse. 349 out of 365 Division I basketball teams this season. And heck, speaking of the KenPom rankings, my goodness, A&M ends up 33rd at the end of the season. The Tigers right now are currently 56th. That seems like for the Tigers to end up anywhere close to where A&M is, and again, obviously the committee looks more at net rating, for an example, but still, that just gives you a good idea of just how far Missouri still needs to climb in the metrics to even have the resume that Texas A&M had a few years ago when they missed the field. Again, that non-conference schedule, it may have some advantages to it, but the disadvantage is it just makes your margin for error in the SEC a lot thinner, a lot more thin. And indeed, so that just makes it, even if Missouri does go 10-8, I don't think you can guarantee anything. Certainly 9-9, based on history that I just gave you there, I think 9-9 is almost a no-go. 10-8, I think, is a coin flip. 11-7 is where you're feeling safe if you're a Missouri basketball fan just in terms of getting into the dance. That's just how I'm seeing it. Now, I mentioned Mizzou Arena, such a better experience, in my opinion, than actually watching it on television. Well, there is still one thing that will get my goat at Mizzou Arena, and that's the officiating, especially the, nonstop stoppages. But beyond that, I will just say it's been interesting to watch the ongoing ebb and flow of officiating throughout the years, because when I was growing up watching Missouri basketball, and really even especially, I would say, deep into the Quinn Snyder and Mike Anderson eras, I thought the game was often way too physical in the Big 12. It was murder ball in the paint at times. And I think that's very true in pro basketball as well today. The game has changed. And I think it's quite the opposite today, especially, again, let's focus on college basketball, where, for example, the idea of the principle of verticality, I just saw this a million times, multiple times in the Missouri-Oklahoma game. Hey, there goes my hyperbolic mouth once again, saying a million times. But several times in the Missouri-Oklahoma game in the past few weeks, you just see a big man, whether it's for Missouri or the opposition, by the way. This is not a Missouri thing. This is an SEC and college basketball thing. But the big man will jump straight up in the air, seemingly with his arms straight up in the air. The old principle of verticality we've heard about for at least a decade or something like that. Well, now it just seems like not only you have to have that, your body has to be perfectly square to your offensive player, to your opposition, if there's any contact whatsoever. And even on the perimeter, it's the same type of deal. And again, back in the 90s, the early aughts, I thought the game was way too physical on the perimeter as well as in the post, when, of course, hand checking ruled the day, and you could just basically, as a defender, you could just constantly shove the offensive player, basically. Well, obviously, I think that was a little too far. My point is, now I feel like we've gone too far the other way, and every little bit of contact is rewarded, to the point where you see so many players now are almost seemingly solely focused, or at least way more focused than they should be, on just drawing contact and trying to force the officials' hands on technicalities. And that's just not the type of basketball that I think most fans really are here to watch. By the way, it was just pointed out to me as I hit pause on the podcast in our SEC group chat that Locked On Ole Miss's Stephen Willis sounds like, Billy Bob Thornton. We've heard that for about the millionth time. And, I actually restrained myself. I was actually about to make a very, very inappropriate landman reference, but reminded myself that, yes, I do work with these people. Some modicum of professionalism would be good to hold on to every once in a while. But you know what? Let's get back to football, by the way, as the program unfolds here, because, and I've really said that phrase about 14 times, haven't I? As the program unfolds here. Let's maybe throw that one out for the rest of the week. But I do want to talk about punting, because ever since, I guess, the Corey Fatone era, I would say, he was the last really good punter for Missouri, I would say. Ever since, it just feels like the Tigers have been searching for somebody. But I don't want fans to overrate punting, but I also don't want them to underrate the importance of field position either. If that seems like a bit of a dichotomy, let's jump into it here in just a little bit. But you know what? I do want to talk just a tiny bit more basketball here really quick, because this is Mazda's moving the game forward. For those who sure there's more to the score than what's on screen. And, of course, it'd be easy to highlight Trent Pierce or Mark Mitchell and their heroics against Oklahoma. But you know what? I want to remind people of how good T.O. Barrett was in the game. And the guy's just kept his head down and obviously kept working hard and working on his game all season. And obviously his attention to detail has helped him earn more minutes, a starting role this past game, and an excellent game against the Sooners. So good for him. And when it comes to Mazda and its vehicles, they put the same passion into every model. Highlights make the reel. What it took to get there, that was what truly makes it counts. There's more to a Mazda because there is more to you. So even though Missouri has been certainly below average in punting over the last few seasons, maybe of all of the Eli Drinkwitz era, I would not argue with that whatsoever. But what I would argue is that what constitutes a bad punter is a lot better than what it used to be. So to my point, last season in net punting, that means not just how far the ball went, but how far the opposition returned it as well. So in net punting last season, Connor Wesselman was at 38.1 yards. And the best in all of the Southeastern Conference was at 44 yards. So that's about a 6-yard difference, or half of a first down, more or less. So field position matters a lot. It really, really does. Obviously, the more first downs you have to pick up, the more yards you have to cover, well, the less likely you are to score. But the thing is, and this is obvious when you think about it, field position is dictated a heck of a lot more by how your offense and your defense perform versus the freaking punter. I mean, really, a 40-yard net punt with no return, you just kick the thing out of bounds or just dribbles out, yada, 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 especially when you've got a good offense and a good defense. To me, that's a beautiful thing. What you don't want to have happen, you don't want to have a team house a punt for a touchdown. You don't want to get the thing blocked, of course. As long as you don't have any disasters punting-wise, I really think you're okay. And really, when it comes to punting and the ability to boom the football, well, that's great. That's wonderful. But there is the reason that the phrase out-kicking your coverage, that is a cliche for a reason. That is a real thing. So to me, the ability to keep the ball inside actually the 20-yard line, that's the biggest difference maker. It's the guys who can consistently get that thing coffin cornered, as the old phrase goes, at the 10-yard line, even at the 5, that type of deal. I mean, that's really, really valuable. And there are a few guys out there, like Michael Dixon, I would say, for the Seattle Seahawks, was incredible in the NFC title game. He's a real weapon. And by the way, I think he won the Texas Bowl MVP, right, against Missouri a few years ago in that bowl game. So for the Texas Longhorns. So he's one of the rare difference makers at that position. But because I think everybody else, not only just the punters, but the coverage units as well, have gotten so much smarter and better over the years, I don't want to overrate punting. I really don't, because everything, of course, on the football field is important. It's just some things are a heck of a lot more important than others. And even when it comes to just the simple variable of field position, in fact, how your offense and your defense perform is of a heck of a lot more important than your punter. There is literally zero doubt about that. And by the way, speaking of my SEC group chat, well, a lot of my fellow Locked On SEC hosts get really animated about the Big Ten versus SEC argument. But I got to say, maybe in this just is partially because I've still spent the majority of my lifetime as a Missouri fan, but pre-SEC, being a fan of the Big 8 and Big 12 versions of the Tigers. But I just don't have that same level of conference pride, I suppose, number one. But number two, I just don't really see how, Georgia and Alabama and LSU, I guess more specifically Oklahoma, in the college football playoff or in any of these various bowl games, for example, if the SEC goes 0-6 or 0-8 or 10 in these bowl games, who cares? From my perspective as a Missouri fan, what in the world does it matter to me? Because obviously, for the foreseeable future, the Big Ten and the SEC are the big dogs in college football. And as long as you're in one of them, frankly, as long as you're in the Southeastern Conference, well, you're going to go down with the ship. I don't know what the future of college football looks like. Maybe it'll be amazing. Maybe it will shrink. I don't know. But if it does shrink in the future someday, again, I promise you, the Southeast, that region geographically, the Southeastern Conference specifically, that's going to be the final thing that goes down with the ship. So it's going to be up to college football in general to worry about that. As long as Missouri is in the SEC, it's in the catbird seat. We're doing just fine where we are. So whether or not Vanderbilt is the champion or Texas is the champion or Alabama is the champion, and whether they lose to Ohio State or Purdue in the college football playoff, I just don't think that affects Missouri. As long as those big old SEC checks keep coming in, as long as Missouri is competitive in the portal, what in the world does it matter what the rest of the Southeastern Conference does? I'm sorry, if you feel differently about it, that's certainly your right. I just really don't see why I, as a Missouri fan, am supposed to care. Show me how it matters to me. Show me how it affects the actual Tigers, and then I'll actually care. But hey, thanks for joining this podcast today, as per usual. And by the way, if you'd like to check out some ad-free shows, well, you got to check out the Everydayer Club, lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer. And by the way, this is also how you can chop it up with me and my fellow Locked On podcast hosts about, of course, college football and everything else in the sports landscape. Just click on the link in the description of this podcast. So until next time, I am John Miller. Thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou.